We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Susan Deutsch. I am the program manager at the Muse Writers Center, and we are co-hosting this event with Luisa Igloria. A little bit about the Muse. We are a literary nonprofit located in Norfolk, Virginia, and we have classes and literary events and outreach programs. All of our classes and events are online right now, and if you want to see what's coming up, you can go to the-muse.org and check that out. Also, a lot of our youth classes are starting soon. That's for teens aged 12 to 19, and all of our classes for teens this semester are free. So definitely check that out. We have workshops and beginner level classes. I teach a prompt-based writing class that's open to anyone in any genre and experience level, which I'd love to see more people join, which starts in a couple weeks. Little personal plug there. Before we get into this event, however, a few disclaimers. All the work you'll hear read today is the property of the authors unless otherwise stated, and this is in no way a publication of unpublished work. And I will go ahead and hand this off to Luisa Igloria. She is the Virginia Poet Laureate and a wonderful Muse board member and teacher and an amazing poet. And she will be introducing our readers today.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm Luisa Igloria, and before we start, I think I would like to do something in honor of Black History Month. I'd like to share some words from two Black poets which have struck me and stuck with me because of their truth and power. And I go back to these words whenever I think of questions like why poetry or why does language matter? One is a short excerpt from Claudia Rankine's Citizen, and I quote, "Our very being exposes us to the address of another. We suffer from the condition of being addressable. Our emotional openness is carried by our addressability. Language navigates this. Language that feels hurtful is intended to exploit all the ways that you are present. Your alertness, your openness, and your desire to engage actually demand your presence. You're looking up, you're talking back, and as insane as it is, saying, please." So I really love this passage from Claudia Rankine. The other one, with your permission, is the opening poem from Lucille Clifton's The Book of Light. And it is simply called Light. Many of you probably also have this as a favorite poem. And it lists just different words for light. And I'd like to read it before we start also. Light, ray, stream, gleam, beam, sun, glow, flicker, shine, lucid, spark, scintilla, flash, blaze, flame, fire, serene, lucifers, lightning bolt, luster, shimmer, glisten, gloss, brightness, brilliance, splendor, sheen, dazzle, sparkle, luminous reflection, kindle, illuminate, brighten, glorious, radiate, radiant, splendid, clarified, clear. So guiding us are these words by these wonderful poets. And again, welcome. This is the second in a three-part program series called Changing the World, One Poem at a Time. And I thank Susan, Michael Candlewall, and the Muse Writers Center for being so generously collaborative with us and hosting us. I also want to thank the Poetry Society of Virginia, the Academy of American Poets, and the Mellon Foundation, whose support has made this and my other programs possible. As a little backgrounder, one of my cornerstone projects as 20th Poet Laureate of the Commonwealth of Virginia is the Virginia Young Poets in the Community Project. So in June of last year, a statewide call was sent out for poets to send not only their best work, but also a project proposal highlighting poetry's role in public life, specifically in the young poets communities. 24 young poets in the community were selected from all over Virginia, and they had the opportunity to carry out their projects on or before June this year. Now, today's program features 6 college undergraduate poets selected as the first cohort of Virginia Young Poets in the community. And I'm excited to present them briefly, but each of them will tell you more about themselves and their poetry projects and what it means to them to be selected as a Virginia Young Poet in the community, and then read their poems for us. And then afterwards, we'll just have a little bit of conversation. First off, is Aderonke Adelenke of Chesapeake, Virginia, who is a sophomore at Old Dominion University. And she has chosen as her mentor Heather Weddington, who is her creative writing professor. Just give us a wave, Addie. There you are. And we have Shawna Alston, who is a freshman at the College of William and Mary and a graduate of Granby High School in Norfolk, Virginia. And her mentor is Eddie Dow, who's her former AP literature teacher, also at Granby High School. Thanks for being here. And we have Virginia Kane of Alexandria, Virginia, whose debut poetry chapbook, If Organic Deodorant Was Made for Dancing, love that title, was selected as the inaugural poetry release for Sunset Press in 2019. She's a senior at Kenyon College studying English and Women's and Gender Studies, and she reads for the Kenyon Review. Her mentor is Dr. Orchid Tierney, also at Kenyon College. Then we have Hailey Lanford of Arlington, Virginia. Hey, Hailey, who is finishing her Bachelor of Arts in English with a minor in linguistics at George Washington University. She is an alumna of Northern Virginia Community College and the Center for Fine and Performing Arts, formerly at Woodbridge Senior High School. And her mentor is Thea Brown, a professor of English at George Washington U. We are still waiting on our 6th poet. I'm just going down the line alphabetically, so hopefully Molly Rufus can join us soon. But we have Mariah Salazar-Solórzano of Alexandria, Virginia, who is a sophomore at Northern Virginia Community College. And her mentor is Nicole Tong, professor of English at Northern Virginia Community College, and also the Poet Laureate of Fairfax County. So you have some really great supports, all of you out there. So I'm so pleased. So shall we just begin again alphabetically, boringly, but what you have to say is not going to be boring at all. So Addie, would you like to lead the way?
Hello, my name is Aderonke Adelenke. I am a sophomore at Old Dominion University. I'm currently majored in English, with a concentration of journalism and minoring in communications. I'm so excited to be here. I have so many good reasons to be happy about being selected as one of the great poet laureates of Virginia. So thank you so much. So my project is based on how mental health and writing your feelings out have that symbiotic relationship. Mental health is really big for me. My parents are immigrants, and that's not a huge topic that they grew up learning about. So, it's basically suffer in silence and just work hard, and hopefully you'll get successful, and hopefully through that success you'll become happy, and things like that. But I think happiness is more than just success. We all have bad days, good days, days that we want to give up. And through this project, I'm hoping that it will open a gateway for people on my campus to use not only poetry, but writing or talking things out to help their mental health. So my project is to set up anonymous poetry boxes all across campus, or in the 2 main buildings that we use on campus. And people can just write basically if they're feeling good that day through poetry, whether it's free verse or a structured way to write poetry, or just things that cause them to release some kind of emotion in a positive, more effective way. And through this, I'm hopefully going to create a program that will be set in April, which is the National Poetry Month, I believe. Yes. So basically, I'm just going to set a program and hopefully read some of the submissions with their permission, obviously, and just have people from outside who are psychologists or counselors from ODU campus to just talk briefly about why mental health and keeping it, I guess, keeping your mental health well is good. And just publicizing the counseling services that we do offer at Old Dominion University and external sources as well. So that is my poetry project.
That sounds very exciting. And really, I can't echo what you've said more profoundly. It is very important to us, to our well-being. And I'm glad you're finding a way for poetry to be part of this quest for, it's such a difficult time that we've all been living through, are still living through. So I'm glad you can find a way to use your love for poetry to work in this direction. So would you like to read for us?
Yes, I would like to read. This is actually more of a spoken word piece, and it's called Imaginary Things, that is based on just my family's struggles and how I see my parents overcome daily their struggles and just overcoming that through their way, and how I got inspired through that. So this is Imaginary Things. Growing up in an African household, I never believed that there was a man who annually gave gifts to the entire world, or at least to those who made it on the good list. I never once thought a giant bunny laid eggs full of chocolate or jelly beans, or that there was a pot of gold at the end of every rainbow. The only thing I believed, my single reality was, if I worked hard enough, everything given for free by imaginary things could eventually be all mine. As years passed, another reality set in, and I saw that even if I pushed myself to the very limit, some unknown and external force of nature could reduce all of my progress to nothing. That even if my calculations were 99.99% accurate, fate's humor would give me the 0.01% of failure. Even as I got knocked down, I peeked over to see my parents' faces, who have literally been face to face with rejection and discrimination, but never set their feet on the brakes, so I got up. That's when I realized that resiliency does not kick in when the road is smooth. No, resiliency enables us to switch gears and bear the bumpy trail along with the unexpected potholes of life. Your struggles and your stories may never resemble mine or even the person sitting next to you, but each of us has had to wear a superficial smile as if it matched our outfit of the day every day. When all hope is gone and you've looked around for a sign of help in your season of distress, there is only one thing that you can be sure of. That as long as there is breath in your lungs, you have a chance, not only to find a solution to your problems, but to overcome the external force of nature that comes and goes at any given time. One thing to note is that struggles of life have no choice but to retract when its job is done in that particular season. What I'm saying is everything happens for a reason. There is a purpose behind your pain, and product follows your persistence. Don't be carried away by a chapter in your story. Be determined to reach the end of it. No one knows your story better than you do. So get creative when things are randomly edited in and out of it. In the days to come, I hope that we all, in any season we may find ourselves in, remember that one season of struggle is simply a season, not the end of your story. In every season, remain resilient. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Addie. You know, a lot of what you said, especially at the beginning, also resonates with me because I'm also an immigrant and a woman of color, poet of color. I really also relate to the idea of that, the raft of unspoken expectations that we all carry from somewhere, whether or not we are immigrants. We bear something of that. Thank you for the true words you've spoken in that poem. Now I would like to turn it over to Shawna.
Hi guys, I'm Shawna. I'm a first year at the College of William and Mary, and I've attended a double major in English and Africana Studies. My poetry project is a three-stage poetry workshop that I intend to host virtually on Zoom, as you know, we are still in a pandemic and that can be a little tricky to do in-person events. But the object of this workshop is to help youth, specifically youth ages 12 to 18, explore the limits, or as I say, go past the limits of poetry in the American education system. I want to show teens that you don't have to write a sonnet, or you don't have to write an iambic pentameter, or you don't have to write a limerick to write good poetry. It's what you believe portrays or gets your message across the best. And I plan to host this in April and in May, or in March and in April, I think, because April is National Poetry Month. And the first poetry workshop is going to be in a couple of weeks, actually, on March 4th. So I'm excited about that. And then the poem I am going to read for you guys today is one of the ones I submitted for my Young Poets in the Community application. The prompt it was actually in my 12th grade English class. I'm not in 12th grade anymore, obviously, but I really love this work. The prompt was to write about something taboo or that poets don't normally write about, and don't tell us what it is until the end, or don't tell us what it is at all. And my poem is called Rootbound. And it reads, it covers the fists of my ancestors, covers the faces of my little cousins. It fills the holes in the front yard. It is the grounding, rooting substance that life demands. It spreads like songs of Solomon. It's a proverb in this home. As Mama sits in the dining room and repots her elephant ear, we reverence it. We worship it, even when we are told that it is the only resemblance that we hold to the earth. We are beautiful, as is it. And my mama always taught me that a little dirt never hurt nobody. If you couldn't tell, the poem is about dirt. And I appreciated the prompt because oftentimes you're asked to write about love, or to write about life, or to write about light. And it was refreshing to write about something that most people kind of tend to avoid writing about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great poem and that's a great prompt. And I think, when we have our conversation towards the end, I hope that everyone will be able to share a little favorite writing prompt of their own too with everyone in the audience who's watching with us, because we all get excited about things like that. But thank you for that, Shawna. Great poem. Virginia, I'm turning the floor over to you, or the microphone over to you. Virginia Kane.
Yeah, hi, I'm Virginia. I'm a senior at Kenyon College, and I'm studying English with a creative writing emphasis and also women's and gender studies. And it's such a joy and like an honor to be here with you all and to hear your work and your projects and just a lot more about each of you. So thank you for making the time and sharing so generously of yourselves. I am, for my public poetry project, designing a virtual month-long workshop for high schoolers in my region who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I kind of came across this idea because as a queer writer myself, I was thinking so much about how formative poetry was to me in those years of my life, being 14, 15, 16, and knowing that I was experiencing confusion and isolation and looking for a sense of identity and community. Poetry was the first kind of location where I found that, whether it was in the voices of people writing those books who shared that part of their identity with me, or in the kinds of spaces that I would show up to and meet people in who are also sharing their work at open mics and on literary magazines and things like that. And throughout college, as I've been writing more and meeting more poets and also taking classes in feminist and queer theory, I started to notice so many overlaps between ideas relating to people who are marginalized, on the basis of gender, sexuality, or both, and between poetry and just kind of the experience of being queer and poetry, whether it's, ambiguity and kind of that comfort with the unknown or not fitting into a certain category or resisting a binary. And also both of them are so invested in memory and, trying to resist erasure and trying to, build new worlds as a means of survival and hope. And so I wanted to kind of create this workshop space, designing a syllabus that not only highlighted work by some of my favorite queer and trans poets, but then also had prompts that allowed, high schoolers who are beginning to, or maybe know these parts of themselves better, to kind of sit with those ideas and those pieces of work. And I'm really looking forward to that. Mine is also going to be in April for National Poetry Month. And we're just going to meet on the weekends and talk about some pieces of work, some prompts. I'm going to also have some visiting writers come in who are part of the community. And I'm just really excited to kind of learn alongside people and learn as I go in teaching a workshop like that. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess I will then jump into my poem, which I wrote about a few years ago at this point, but I was sitting a lot with the lines that are often drawn between friendship and romantic love and that kind of confusing relationship or tension between what is admiration and what is attraction, and the ways that we sort of influence one another and mirror one another. And kind of in line with some of the themes I was talking about, I decided to explore this poem, or use this poem as a way to explore those ideas. So this piece is called, "I'm Still Not Sure If I Wanted to Be Those Girls or If I Wanted to Be in Love with Them. But what I do know is when Jacqueline untwisted the rubber band separating her braids from the golden tufts emerging from elastic grasp like tips of twin paintbrushes, I wanted her fingers. In place of my own or interlaced with them, I wasn't positive, since she had braces and a late August sock tan, shin guard imprints that bore into her calves long after practice ended, and we flung ourselves face first over the back seat of her mother's air-conditioned minivan, stripped our bodies of their plastic armor to the pulse of the FM Top 10 countdown, since really, if I talked myself through it long enough, what I wanted most were the tangerine swirls dotting the white polish on each of her nail beds, how she began gnawing their tips as soon as the ball catapulted someplace far on our opponent's side, and the two of us hung back in defense, entertained by nothing but the study of her hands until the game shifted, and a herd of girls descended across the midfield line to invade our sacred shield, which I would have minded if I didn't also want to be them too, panting and furious in the direction of their want, final gasp of daylight flirting on their hamstrings while they grapevined over grass clumps. How could I not want to be these girls? Mouths agape while they waterfalled ice currents from each other's igloos, wiped the excess droplets from their chins with the hems of their mesh pennies, and me, always the complimenter, never the starer, quick to admire, but quickest to run back on field when the whistle blew. So later, when I knew enough to know I shouldn't want them, these girls, their leg hair damp with chlorine, while we basked face up in an oval around Madison's backyard pool, muscles cooling from that afternoon's doubleheader, heads on each other's abdomens, I decided this was it. Not the flicker of my heart, but its ravenous envy, not attraction, but misplaced insecurity, the silhouette you wait for each night in the neighbor's window, not to watch her undress, but to study how she moves when her blinds are drawn, and you stare from the street below, the entire district sleeping while you straddle the difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Virginia. Oh my goodness, the way you read through that, it's like a waterfall. And I'm sure we'll hear more about process too, if any of our young poets here would like to share anything about that later in our conversation, but we'd like to move on, or I'd like to move on, and I would like to call on Hailey Lanford.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be doing this today. I'm a senior at the George Washington University, studying English, minoring in linguistics, which is very exciting. I love both of those interests very much, and the English department is my home, so very happy about that. For my poetry project, I've decided to really focus in on community. Community for me has meant so much, whether that's the writing community or communities that I've been able to find on campuses, whether that was at Nova Community College or at GW. I've always been able to really find a really solid place to call home and just find really supportive people. And I wanted to give back to those people in a really meaningful way that, you know, I feel like I can relate to and kind of show my passions and my power through. And so I've decided to create a write night with my communities called The Power of Poetry, a community write night. And it's all going to go back to and benefit the Make-A-Wish kids of Mid-Atlantic, of the Mid-Atlantic chapter. And hopefully, I'm really hoping that this happens like around April, end of April, May, as like a kind of senior thesis type of deal. But it'll benefit them. It's going to incorporate a little bit of like all the types of communities that I've been able to foster over the past few years, but it's definitely just going to be like centered around those kids and their wants and their needs. I'm very excited about it. And then I guess for my poem, I'll be reading Soft Apples. I wrote this in Thea Brown's class, fall of 2020, which feels so not long ago. But I wrote this and I just remember being in quarantine. We were online for that entire year. And so this really means a lot, just like looking back and remembering where I was at that time. So this is Soft Apples. Soft apples are the hardest to chew. Skin that sticks to the roof of my mouth, a flavor so mild it barely sits on the tongue. The bite, the last remnants of something tangible, slides down my fingers unsatisfyingly. Each movement of my mouth reminds me just how much humans let things rot before noticing their goodness, feeling the shame of letting a good apple go to waste. So I chew. I wait for peace to find me with a gnawed apple core held by a frail stem. Thank you.
Wow, that line about not noticing the sweetness until it rots. I love that. Thank you, Hailey. And I guess I'm really not sure. I hope everything's okay with Molly, our other poet, but Mariah, let's hear from Mariah Salazar-Solórzano now. About her project and then about her poem, and listen to her read her poem.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for having me. I've loved hearing all of your guys' projects and poems. So my name is Mariah Salazar-Solórzano. I'm in my final semester, it looks like, at Northern Virginia Community College. Super excited to see where I transfer from there. But I really only got into writing poetry a few months ago. And so when I had to come up with like a project idea, I was looking back at the poems I had written, and it looked like I had written poems about youth, about being really young, about being a teenager, about being a young adult. But the one category that I really didn't touch on in any of my writing or in anything that I really contemplated was in the elder community. But I've been really fortunate to have a lot of really awesome, strong elder figures in my life, whether that's neighbors or people I interact with in my communities. And I think it really came from a point where I was talking with one of my neighbors and she started just telling me a story about her life. And I thought about just how rich her experiences had been in life and how I don't often see that in writing. So my project that I propose and that I'll be executing here until through the spring is to interview, or just really to have conversations with elders in my community, some that I know and some that I don't know, who would be willing to volunteer and share their stories. From there, to write poems based on that and share them with them, and then hopefully be able to do a few readings of them at my school and in different parts that I'm a member of a community. So I'm really excited to just have the conversations really, and then to from that take inspiration and write some really cool poems that encapsulate the things that people hold on with them for decades. I think is a really interesting subject matter. But my poem is about a 19-year-old. I wrote it for my best friend's birthday this past summer, and she's from Chile originally. And so the poem has a lot of like thematic stuff with that, but it's called Mi Copiwe, which is the national flower of Chile. So Mi Copiwe. In southern Chile, I pick a dozen flowers, handfuls of monjitas and capachitos, but I leave one vine untouched, the copihue, its blood red petals far too precious to be trapped in a vase and left to wilt. In Ercia, I regret the times I failed to notice the careless boys who tore off petals as they ran away, but then I remember that she comes from the strong earth, men who fought and won the soil she calls home. Only a few years I have known this bell-shaped flower, but today she turns 19. She's weathered storms and lived to see the sun to bloom another spring. Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love the idea for your project too, Mariah. I think stories are such a powerful source of not just connection. Definitely, they are rich material for language in any kind of expressive, format, whether it's poetry or song. But I think stories really knit us together. I mean, you sit down next to someone, and next thing you know, you're hearing a snippet of story. It doesn't matter if you don't know the person, and then there's just wonderful way in which we connect with each other, and that's such an amazing thing that you want to do in your community. So good luck, and I'm really excited to see all the outcomes before the school year is over, or before the summer starts. But I really wanted this time also for you to connect with each other and talk about things that matter to you as poets, matter to you in your immediate world right now. But before that, I mean, have you thought about this idea of poetry as being a way to tide us over through this strange, weird time? People talk about self-care a lot. People talk about, being connected and being safe. And, how have you thought poetry to be a way to do all these things during this weird time that we're all experiencing, the pandemic, Zooming, everything is virtually mediated, and other kinds of experiences. Is there anything you wish that, were different, or you think poetry could make a difference in this time? And I'll just throw it out there, and you can just pick it up and go wherever you want to go with that. I'm also just leaving my mic on, and you can do the same thing if you'd like. So anyone can just jump in. Like maybe I can share also. Somebody has asked me if it has made a change in my writing habits, or in whether I write only about depressing things that are happening. And I find that I taught a workshop not too long ago for the Muse, and I suddenly wanted to write about, or to have a workshop focused on the idea of joy, because there's so much that is non-joyful, it seems, in our world. And it felt to me like a really important thing to be able to do, and to embrace and feel that, no, it's not a corny thing. It is a very important thing to be able to write about joy in our poems, and to kind of look for it in our lives. So I don't know how that resonates with you, if anything, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. And we have some comments from some of our viewers saying, lovely readings. I agree, beautiful poetry. Thank you for sharing with us. But this idea of poetry as a vessel that can contain so many different things, not just the difficulties, but maybe also, how does it uplift you? Would someone like to share anything about that? Addie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what you just said about how you had to, I guess, make a whole thing about writing about joy. Mm-hmm. And I think really, really cool, because I'm not good at writing when I'm happy, or I guess if that makes any sense, if you can agree with me. But I'm just not good at writing positivity, or not writing positivity, but if I'm feeling in my lowest state, I think it's just, I write the best things. And I don't know what it is about that, but I don't know. I think it's just really weird, but it's hard to write happy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I also agree with that wholeheartedly. And I feel like we've had, well, not we as in this group, I feel like I've been in conversation and in discussion about this a whole lot within the past couple of years, of like writing when it's cathartic and having like that space to let emotions out, and it's usually more negative emotions, but finding space specifically within this pandemic to find joy through writing again. I feel like especially as we grow up, there's less time to really sit down and like process those like good feelings. And so for me, that's something that I've really been trying to work on. Is it going very well? Not really, but it's the thought that matters, and it's the process that counts. So I definitely feel you, like having to kind of dig for that positive writing motivation is a lot harder than when you're in your lowest moments and you're just looking for that like comfort within yourself and your words. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's also about a lot about vulnerability, about the idea of, wow, I'm going to be showing a lot of things that give you all the feels, right? And it's very hard to bring oneself there to actually look at those things. But for me, I think, I've just realized that poetry is my preferred way to process, I guess. It's a place where I prefer to process the things that life throws at me, if you will. So I guess I have more or less comfort with all of these things, like you do, I'm sure, depending on the day, depending on the, whatever you're going through. But just telling myself it's okay to go there, I think helps a lot. And I just try not to freak out too much and then try to see, if the words come that help support that moment. And Mariah, did you want to share anything? Yeah.
I definitely agree with like everything that everyone said. It's a lot easier to write, I think, when I'm experiencing like sad or negative emotions. And I think that does come from a place of processing, like getting those words on the page, and even like the mental exercise of like making sadness sound beautiful, or making it really like express what I'm feeling in my head and get it on the page. Even just doing that mental process helps. And so I definitely think I relate on that point, but I think it's also like a day-to-day thing. And so staying connected through poetry at this point is, there's some days where I wake up and I am really upset. I can see really the effects and the toll that the pandemic has taken on me and on others. And then there's other days that I wake up and I see like a silver lining in it, and I want to write about that. So I think it's a day-to-day thing, but I think it also helps writing poetry through this, especially when we were in isolation, to see other living poets writing, and to know in that sense that you're not alone. Like, it's not just old poetry books that maybe we read in school, but that living poets are posting about the pandemic we're living through makes it feel like, oh, this is a real thing that's happening. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one writing, even if I can't congregate with these people in person. So
yeah, that's so important to realize. And I agree with everything you've said. So I'm just piggybacking off of what you've said, Mariah, being inspired by other living poets, you say, who are also going through the same thing and sharing their words, sharing out their writing in all of these vulnerable spaces. We have a lot of channels for getting poetry, not just in books now. So who are some of your poetry heroes or sheroes, and how have you looked to these poets specifically for inspiration? Who are some of your favorites? Yeah, Shawna.
I can answer. I personally recently read a collection of poetry by Luisa Clifton, which is why I was so excited when you read one of her works as our opener. I enjoy when I don't understand what a poem is talking about. I really love the way Luisa Clifton writes from her experience, but she writes in a way that you feel and don't understand. Like the words kind of imitate the emotion that she was feeling when she was writing. And I have no idea what she's saying, but I felt everything that she felt in that moment. And I always try to kind of get my poetry to do the same thing. Like, even if my reader doesn't understand my poetry, they will kind of feel the things that I felt writing that poetry. And that's why I really enjoy Luisa Clifton's work.
So you're talking about this, I don't know how to call it, but sometimes I think about it. This is sort of mysterious sense that poetry gives us of making inroads to not just feeling, but also thought. It's like you feel it before you understand the idea of what the poet is talking about. So to me, it's almost like the effect of music, maybe, or art. It moves you before you even, logically, I guess, give words to it. And for me too, that's like the deep mystery of poetry, is that it can do that. It can transport you. And then you're like, what just hit me, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. What about the rest of you? So Lucille Clifton, I love her too so much. Yeah. Anybody else want to share about their favorite, most inspirational, or even a new discovery of a poet that you just found, who like really spoke to you?
I can jump in. There's
Sure.
so many, but this morning I was listening to an interview with Sharon Olds, and she's so cool because she's pretty she's older, I guess. She's like maybe in her 70s at this point, had a long career, but she writes about very taboo things and writes like odes to the body and like different parts of the body, and writes a lot of like very candidly about motherhood and marriage or divorce or relationships, and just did that at a time where it wasn't necessarily considered normal or allowed. And I think we've been lucky to grow up in a poetry community where there is a lot more openness towards those kinds of topics. And I know, like, I grew up watching button poetry, or like, falling in love with poets on Instagram, or now TikTok, and a lot of like millennial poets or Gen Z poets. But it was really cool to kind of learn more about her today and how she's been doing that kind of before there was necessarily like, that was normalized. I also have been reading a lot of like Ross Gay during the pandemic. I think
I love Ross Gay too.
Joy, he's a really important figure. I mean, even just like the titles of his books, like Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude or the Book of Delights, like there's so much bursting there about not necessarily like only seeing the joy in something. Like he always contextualizes joy amidst adversity and amidst really real parts of being alive, and especially like as the person that he is. But I think he's really wonderful at paying attention and just observing and looking really honestly at what is good and salvageable, in addition to what is really painful and dark. And and he runs I believe an orchard or like a community garden in his hometown, and I think that's really cool.
And his personality is also really joyful and open and welcoming. So I love both the examples that you brought up, both Sharon Olds and Ross Gay. Would the rest of you like to jump in with your own favorites before we talk about? Go ahead.
Yeah, I really love everything that breakbeat poets or that sort of whole thing. I know that to me, being Latina, the Latinx collection meant a lot, like seeing even all the author bios in the back, reading about them, and getting that sort of anthology to me really helps to see living poets. And on top of that, someone that I identify with, a community I identify with. And a really big thing for me was, for a long time, I thought that Spanish language didn't have a place in English writing. And I thought that when people would put like Spanish words or slang in it, that it was improper, or that it wasn't as good as it would be if it wasn't there. And so reading these collections and reading poetry that relates so closely to my experience and seeing them use that language really challenged the way I viewed it. And I loved experiencing that and sort of changing my mind. And it's really hard. Like, I remember when I first got into poetry, trying to find like authors and poets who I related to, who I felt like I saw a piece of myself in them, was really hard. So to have like an anthology like that with breakbeat poets, to me is just super, like to hold it, right? And to see like last names, see last names with like the accent above an O or something like that, where I was like, that's me, like to the fullest extent, and to read all of it. So I think that to me is like my favorite source, is the people who are really doing like the groundwork to anthologize and to get people's names out there.
Right. And obviously, if you speak more than one language, why should you not be able to reflect that organically in everything you do or in everything
Yeah.
you write? Because it is part of you. It is organically part of who you are. So I can't remember. Do you even italicize words in your other language or in your other tongue when you write in English? Because I've come to a point I used to also kind of think about that a lot. Because besides English, I also speak Tagalog and Ilocano, which is one of the other languages up north in the Philippines, which is my birth country. And, in recent years, perhaps in the last like 4 or 5 years, I've stopped italicizing the words and pointing to them, putting these sort of artificial markers of them that kind of seem to say, hey, look, this is foreign, because it's not foreign to me, right? So anyway, I've also slowly come around to that idea to embrace more of all of these things that for others may be markers of my difference, but for me are really not. They're part of who I organically consider myself to be, and as I'm developing too. So thank you for those experiences that you've shared it with us, Mariah. Hailey, would you like to share anything?
Yeah, I was actually going to give a shout out to Amanda Gorman, because ever since she read at the inauguration, I've been obsessed with her and all of her work. I really wanted to buy her book recently, but I haven't been able to, so that's on my to-do list. But I think she's just been one of those people that I just kind of look to as like a very close person in age, and so it's really enlightening to see someone do such great work, and both poetically but also just community wise, just be a really shining light. But I also want to give a few shout outs from a few poetry classes and a few other classes that I've taken surrounding Black artists, Black poets, Black writers. And so I have a couple copies in front of me. Gil Scott-Heron was really great. I really loved this book. All of his poetry was just beautiful. Highly recommend it. I've been obsessed with Rita Dove ever since high school. My creative writing teacher that I was with all 4 years was very much a Rita Dove fan. So naturally, I also became a Rita Dove fan. And we ended up reading one of her books this past semester. So On the Bus with Rosa Parks is really great. And then There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce by Morgan Parker is also really good. Highly recommend. I've tagged a couple things in here. But all of those poets are just mind-blowing. They keep me going on hard days.
We should all just exchange reading lists on email. That would be so great. But at this point, maybe I thought it might be a fun idea to also share with our audience or take questions if they have questions for any of you. I think Susan, are we able to see questions from the audience if they come in? I think so far I just see clapping hands and comments on how beautiful your readings were, and you're all amazing readers. I'm so happy. But also I thought another fun thing was maybe if you could share a favorite writing prompt with any of our audience who might want to use that too and run with a new idea, and just something about process also is very helpful. So if there's anything you want to share in that regard, I'm just throwing that out there. Talk about a favorite prompt or talk about a favorite part of process that works for you as a poet. There is actually, here, a question. Tell us something about how you learned, tell us about something you learned or came across that changed something about how you are writing. So it's a question from Kathy Hailey. Thank you, Kathy. Would anyone like to pick up that thread? Something you learned or came across that changed something about how you are writing.
Personally, I read my first Toni Morrison novel. And I've read so many now, but I was a senior in high school, and all seniors in high school at Granby had to read Beloved. And all of my peers were like, oh my God, I can't get through it. I can't get through it. And I had already read it a second time by the time we had to write the essay on it. And I really loved the way Toni Morrison wrote prose like song, like poetry. Like you read Toni Morrison and it doesn't read like prose at all. It's very rhythmic and it's very sensual and it's very lyrical. And now I try to write all of my poetry like Toni Morrison writes prose. And sometimes I fall a little short because I, don't have half, the talent that she had, but it felt very, it was fun for me to kind of step into this like new writing style. And I think I got pretty good at it, but that's really what kind of honed in my own writing style.
So for you, it's like reading in a different genre and also reading a powerful example of that genre. I think, it's so great when we feel like we're given permission to do something that we never maybe considered doing in our own writing before. So I hear you completely. That's a great example. Anybody else want to answer Kathy's question about something you learned that changed something about how you're writing? Yeah, Beloved was also favorite of Susan's from Eddie Dow's class. Yeah.
I can also speak on that because I feel like I had a very similar experience, but kind of like in an opposite way. So I also write nonfiction pieces and kind of go down like that narrative route. And I realized this semester while in my nonfiction class just how much poetry infiltrates into other areas of my life. So a lot of like writing that isn't supposed to be poetry comes out more poetic and is very lyrical in that sense. And I feel like even when I intentionally try to avoid poetry, it creeps back in like the most meaningful ways. But it definitely has helped me kind of hone in different voices in different areas and different writing skills. So I just really love that. But I love like Beloved was also kind of like that turning point for me, and specifically Toni Morrison was also that turning point for me. And I feel like her work just really does something for writers.
For a lot of us, really. Yeah, so inspirational. Mariah, did you want to say something about that same question?
Yeah, I think I've learned a couple different things. I feel like I'm always learning something that has to change the way I write. I think two of like the most noticeable ones were one, the way that grammar was set up and who it was meant to leave out from education, from writing, and to learn to challenge that in my writing and not feel like I'm not a good writer because I'm not like the most well-versed in grammar. That was supposed to be a bit of a suppressive system in education and writing. So learning to challenge that and not let that be like so strong of an insecurity. And also, I guess in that same turn of like imposter syndrome or insecurity is that I could bring nonfiction into my writing and that I'm capable of researching something that seems super like difficult to understand and make a really beautiful poem out of it. I had to deal with that when I took a biology class and I couldn't wrap my brain around the way that scientific writers were writing. But I realized that I could conceptualize the very same concepts creatively and really accessible to other people who think the same way that I do when it comes to that. So I think that definitely changed the way I wrote, allowing myself to claim a title of like, I'm a poet or I'm a nonfiction writer and not be scared that like someone's going to tell me I'm not because I don't follow their conventions.
Oh, that is super important. Thank you for those reminders. And yeah, you mentioned research. I've also become a big fan of research and where it can take me. I can't remember when exactly I first learned about in 1904, about 1,100 indigenous Filipinos were brought to St. Louis, Missouri to serve as live exhibits in the World's Fair and Exposition. When I first learned about that, of course, years ago now, I was just obsessed with that. And I started reading more about it. And, I started writing poems and poem sequences, which eventually led to a book where a huge part of the section of my book, Juan Luna's Revolver, is dedicated to poems about me imagining that period in this little known, even to today, history of, people, marginalized people being, serving as spectacle for an American audience. Okay, there is another question or comment. There is a great discussion on the Alaska Quarterly Review's website with Dorian Locks and Jane Hirschfield. You might enjoy listening. It's on YouTube. It's called Facts into Poetry. Yeah, so I love how random facts just suddenly like take a hold of your brain, and then you kind of go down the rabbit holes and you wind up writing poems that you never thought you would wind up writing. And that's always a fun experience for me. Oh, so anybody else want to share anything? What about the writing prompt question would you like to share before we round up our program and go on to celebrate the rest of the weekend and the rest of your writing ahead of us and everything else we have to do? Is there any like little writing prompt or process nugget that you'd like to share, throw out there, share with our audience for what works for you or what inspires you?
One time, this is for the writing prompt question, I asked a lot of my closest friends their hobbies or like their interests. And so, you don't like think anything of it. My friends are like, oh, I like to sing, or I play the bass, or, I read how like books about how Europe underdeveloped Africa, something like that. And I took all of their hobbies and I wrote poems about them, basically. And I didn't use their names at all. I just used their interests. And I tried to recreate the image of my friends through their hobbies. And I haven't shared those poems with any of them yet. Maybe if they ask, I'll share, but it's really fun to see how you can rewrite a person, just off of like a small fact about them. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to try that too. Thank you. Anybody else want to share a prompt? Yeah, Addie?
Yeah. A big thing for me is not sleeping, if that makes any sense. I don't know why, but every time I'm like ready to sleep, I just hear like a sentence in my brain or something. And then I'm like, if I don't get this down, I'm going to forget it. And it might be like the greatest thing I've ever written. So I think just staying up past your bedtime and having some time to think, having solitude in the middle of the night, I promise you, like a random phrase might pop up, or just letting your mind wander in the most like quiet times, like in the middle of the night, whatever. I think it's really cool. So
maybe it has something to do with that space between when you're awake and falling asleep, those in between ambiguous pockets of time, and you get to go inside them and discover, oh, there's a line there. Yeah, it's like that dream place, I guess. Yeah. Virginia, did you want to share writing prompt?
Sure. Well, I was gonna I'll give a bit of wisdom and a bit of a prompt, but I think I was thinking about how I took this workshop one time with a writer by the name of Edwin Bodney, and he kind of tried to basically like bust the myth of writer's block and talked a lot about how we only actually are like blocking ourselves when we have writer's block because we feel like our writing isn't good. And so a lot of his takeaway was like that nobody's really prohibiting yourself but you, and that's only a disservice to yourself too. And so I think the idea of like writing through what you would classify as a bad draft when really that judgment is just coming from perhaps within has really stuck with me. And also like the idea that time away from a poem can be, just as valuable as time with that poem. I guess those are kind of complementary or slightly contrasting ideas. And then for a prompt, I'm really intrigued by like maps and the idea of like making a personal map. And so I think I would just say a fun project, whether or not a poem comes from it, is to like make a map of a certain category in your life, like places you've cried or places you experience like the most intense connection to another person, or places you grew something, or places you drank coffee, and then kind of connecting them somehow and maybe seeing a through line, or just thinking about the way that you are moving through those spaces under a certain category of experience. I got that idea from this really beautiful website called Queering the Map, which was like a community generated like whole worldwide map that anybody can add an anecdote to about kind of like a queer experience, and it's really beautiful because you can read all of them, and so people
Do you have the URL? Can you drop that link in the chat for our
yeah,
audience to also share? Yeah,
totally.
those are all great. And when you were speaking right there about the mapping exercise, it made me recall I did a thing with a few of my workshops too, where I guess I talked about building a blueprint or writing down a blueprint of your sort of like how do you call it? Like your internal house. And so you have a house, right? So there's a living room, there's a front room, there's a cellar or an attic, there's a bedroom, there's, other little spaces. What kinds of things would you put in there? What kinds of stories would you put in there? And it's just also one of those things that lead to very productive, like free writes. When you see, what can I talk about that's like front room stuff? What do I keep hidden away in a back closet or in a drawer somewhere? And it can be very, sort of like instructive for oneself. And I hear you a lot about imposter syndrome. I think, we're all afflicted in one way or another. Yeah.
I love that idea.
Thank you. Thank you for dropping the link into the chat also. Anybody else want to share a few final prompts or process nuggets of wisdom, experience?
Yeah, I'm in a creative writing class right now, and it was really fun. We just did this on Tuesday, and it was with vignettes, but immediately my thought was like, this would be such a cool poem as well, or like prose piece. She asked us to write narratively, autobiographically, but through like thematically through hair and like tying our hair down to like different milestones in our life. And at first I was like, this is so random. And then I did it. And I was like, this is one of my favorite things I've written recently. It was just like a really interesting thing to like take something that's always been, I guess, there along with you, but wasn't experiencing it. I guess you don't think about like, oh, my hair is what experienced my life with me, but that it has always been there, and writing it, like focusing on that was really interesting. And then with process, like a couple different of you were talking about like how you write, like whether it's like at night, in the middle of the night. For me, I find that I'll think of a line out of nowhere and it almost feels like cheating when I really like it, because I'm like, where did that come from? It's just in my head. But I'll be doing something, so it has to be a voice memo or like a text to myself or a note, like on the notes app, or scribbled in like the corner of an assignment. And I think for me, realizing that writing poetry wasn't just like sitting down and being like, now it's time to like put on a poet hat, but to like be in this like never like ceasing, like just writing all the time, like whether it's like like when I wake up I have a line, and like Addie said, like I need to write that down, I need, or if I'm waiting in the grocery store and I think of something with like bananas, write it down.
Bananas, yeah. It's like that dream space that Addie was talking about just before sleeping, and then you kind of wake up something else. And Susan, has a side note, the house prompt that I talked about reminds Susan of The Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And I actually also drew a little bit from Gaston Bachelard's book about, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out. Anyway, moment, but because I'm so excited about everything everyone's talking about. I mean, this conversation could go on forever. I wish we were around the physical table, but I would want to thank you all for being here with your amazing poetry, with your amazing visions for what you want to do in your communities with your poetry. It's so wonderful to hear you talk and share about your process, writing prompts, and a little bit of your, glimpses that we have about your life with words. So thank you so much. I'm so happy that you are part of this first cohort of Virginia Young Poets in the Community, and I hope it's a program that will go on forever, right? Even when I'm no longer Poet Laureate or here. So everyone, give us all a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who came to listen, and please mark your calendars. We don't have the links yet, but the final part of this series, which is Changing the World One Poem at a Time. We'll be featuring all our high school winners, and that's going to happen on April 2. Also a Saturday, also probably the same time of day, but watch out for the links closer to the date. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Susan, Shawna, Addie, Virginia, Hailey, Mariah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
Thank you all
Thank
so much
you.
for joining us. Thanks everyone watching live and watching the recording. See you next time, and may everyone continue to find poetry in the liminal spaces of your life.